Just delighted to have you here with us for a 2019 software review. When I say software, it's really ransomware, okay? Which is no longer just a concern. We actually have some live examples of threats against government. And we're joined today by a true subject matter expert, Maria Thompson. Maria, we're so pleased to have you here. She fares from North Carolina, where she serves as the Chief Security Officer for IT, for the technology here across the state. Her background is just fascinating to me. Served the U.S. military in the Marine Corps, where she was involved with cybersecurity, security measures, and worked with NSA, the National Security Agency, as well as a joint task force as well. I believe involved work in Iraq. So we want to thank you for your military service. Many, yeah, we should thank her for that. So. Yeah, Maria has all the credentials, and it's like alphabet soup, but a lot of specialized credentials, also a master's degree in IT. She's received a number of recognitions, including awards from the Secretary of Defense. And so, with no further ado, we're just going to introduce Maria, and welcome to NACOM.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. As you heard, my name is Maria Thompson. I'm going to be very mobile, and I like this to be informal, so please feel free to ask any question at any time, because I want this to be an educational experience, so to bring awareness on what is happening within the state of North Carolina and things that you should be aware of within your organization. So as you heard my background, I've been in the security business for over 20 years, and it is, I guess, I don't know how to say this properly or tactfully, but no matter where you go, the problem is still the same. There's a constant, there's a continuity of deficiencies that I see across all, whether it's DoD, whether it's the federal landscape, private sector, so on and so forth. But I will say that within the local government, it's even worse, and even more so a problem, because they are definitely, they're under-resourced, understaffed, underfunded in a lot of ways. And I'm going to cover some of the ways that within the state of North Carolina, how we're trying to help them from a Department of Information Technology, not a big brother looking down at them or anything along those lines, but more as a supporting element to them as they go through these experiences. So I'll cover some statistics on what we're seeing, what we've seen in the last few years. And if you've ever seen me present, you may see some of these slides, but I apologize for that. But just bear with me as we go through them, because I think, again, it's important that you're made aware of what is happening within the state of North Carolina. So I'm going to be covering ransomware. And why am I covering ransomware? Mainly because it's one of the most, it's the easiest tool that's being used right now to exploit our networks. And it's typically done by, can anyone guess? Phishing? That is the way that they are getting into our environment. And if you're not familiar with phishing, it's when somebody sends you an email and you think that it seems like it could be from somebody that you know, and you click on a link and it downloads malware. That's just one of the ways. It downloads malware to your asset that you're using. Or it could be something where it asks you to give up your credentials, your password, and then they're able to use it to gain access to your network. And sometimes it's not even you. You're not necessarily the target, but you are used in order to get to somebody that has privileged credentials on the network, and they're able to leverage those credentials that may have system admin, super admin rights, and they're able to take over your infrastructure. So some of the things I'm going to cover quickly today are, of course, our statistics, some of the reported incidents that we've seen, cyber trends in general, the speed of the adversary. And when I say adversary, those are the bad guys. Those are the guys the nation state actors that are trying to take advantage or exploit our networks. And I should caution you by saying that majority of the incidents that we've seen within North Carolina, they have not been nation state attacks. They've been just targets of opportunity. It's the spray and pray. Somebody's going to click it, and typically somebody clicks it, and we get compromised. And some of the legislative updates that we've made recently, as recent as last year, August, in order to help to facilitate information sharing between local government and the state, as well as private sector companies. Because we have to take a whole of state approach to cybersecurity. No longer can we think that we could protect our own little enclave, because somewhere we are connected, whether it's through a system that we're sharing information or through relationships, we are connected, and they exploit that. The bad guys do not care whether you're in the executive branch, the judicial branch, the legislative branch. They care nothing of that. In fact, they relish the fact that we have these separations in some cases because that allows them to take advantage of those weaknesses that we have and that aggregated purpose that we could have. They take advantage of that and get into our networks. And then opportunities for questions. Again, feel free to ask questions throughout this whole presentation. So the most common variant of ransomware that we've seen, this is global, by the way, and this was from CSO Online, is Ryuk. 22% of the incidents that have been reported are from Ryuk. The other one is sudden, I'm going to butcher the name of this, so I won't even say that, the S one. And then there's the Dharma and Cobus, but we've never seen that. And the reason why I bring that up, and you'll see in the next few slides why I'm showing you this in particular. Statistics. From a statistics perspective, if you're familiar with the FBI's IC3 report, they have an internet crime report where they collect data across all the states, and they aggregate this and they put it out, they publish it. Last year, as you were 2018 for 2019, we were the 5th highest state in loss of revenue to cybercrime. And now this is reported. It was $137 million that the state of North Carolina, private, public, not just government, that we've lost across the board that's been reported to cybercrime. And it's not just ransomware, and it's not just phishing or anything like that. Think about business email compromises. Are you familiar with business email compromises? When somebody that you think you know, what they've done is they've spoofed your email, and they'll send you an email address, an email that says something like, "Hey, are you at your desk?" And so you respond back, "Yeah, sure, I'm at my desk. I need to transfer X amount of dollars to this account." We have a county in North Carolina, in our North Carolina, this county, the school district, actually transferred $2 million. They were able to recoup, with the help of the FBI, they were able to recoup half of that back, but still, think about that. And it was during a time when we were having hurricanes. So of course, people are more anxious about what's going on with the hurricane. We got to get prepared, so on and so forth. And this person received this email, and they saw the account change, didn't question it, and made that change. And so, when you think about it, it's important that we educate our folks that have access to our data and access to our financial transactions, that if they receive something that just seems out of the ordinary, or if there's an account change, there needs to be a two-step process, verification process, to ensure that we are, doing our checks and balances, our due diligence, before we make such a huge change. And the school did not know this until after the actual contractor contacted them and said, "Hey, we haven't received our payment." And they're like, "But yes, we sent you changed the account." "No, we did not." And then of course we got the FBI engaged, and they were able to recoup some of that money. So again, the state of North Carolina, $137 million. 2019, we had 11 reported cases of ransomware within the local counties and state government. And again, I stress reported, because there are some entities that still pay the ransomware and choose not to report, or out of embarrassment, they don't report that. And of course, and I'm going to cover that in another slide, why it's important to not pay the ransomware, because there's no guarantee in that. 2020, we just started 2020, and what did I find out last Monday? I was on my way to a business trip, and I got a call. We had another county, our first county for the 2020 year, that we're currently right now assisting through their ransomware incident. So it's already started, and we're just new into the new year. This is the list since 2017 of all the counties and all the organizations that have been impacted by ransomware. And you can see, I mentioned Ryuk before, you can see Ryuk pops up numerous times on this slide. And you may be wondering, what's the difference between the red and the black letterings? The red ones are the ones that the state, we were made aware of as soon as it happened, and we were able to go in and assist them. We've partnered with the National Guard. They have I don't know if you know this, but the National Guard, they have a cyber team And we have a really good working relationship, even though they're Army. I'll let that go, but we still get along really well. And truly, I joke about it, but they're like brothers to me. But we have a relationship between them, the emergency management, and also the local IT strike teams. Most of the counties have individuals that are part of a team, an informal team called the IT strike team. And we leverage those individuals to come in and form this cyber response force. So it's like the bat phone. Hey, something's happening. We pick up the call, we get everybody on a line, and we all discuss what the scenario is. We do our scoping engagement, and we have boots on the ground within a couple of hours of that incident. And then we work through that incident. And so DIT, with the help of, and when I say DIT, that's the Department of Information Technology, with the help of the National Guard, with the help of the IT strike team, we've been successful in supporting all these elements through their ransomware issues. And I was told, excuse me, I was told there's some lawyers maybe in this room, folks. So do you know how many law firms have reported cyber incidents in 2019? 100. Data breaches. No, not just one state, just in the US, as far as we know. I read this recently, and that's reported. And so I bring this up only because that is a niche. That's a perfect breeding ground for the bad guys, because they know that law firms have access to a lot of data. You know, there may be a law case that requires you to request all the citizens of North Carolina's data, and how are you protecting that data? You no longer can do it the same way that you've done it in the past, which was just, hey, we're going to stick it in, a drawer or something along those lines. If you're using a system that's internet accessible, that means that there's a potential that it can be compromised. And also think about insider threats. And if you're not familiar with insider threats, those are people that you think are, known good entities that have been working with your organization for years, and for whatever reason, they decide to monetize the situation and either do something destructive or try to make money off the data that you have within your environment. The December 2019, which is the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, first known case. I don't know whether to brag or to cry about that one, but that was an IT individual within that organization that did an insider ransomware. Launched ransomware in his own environment. They're still recovering to this day, and since December. And we actually have some National Guard guys down there helping them to restore their environment. You have to be pretty disgruntled to actually do that. But it happens. And insider threats is on the rise. In fact, I think the last report that I saw was, it was a 47% increase from the past 2 years in insider threats. So what does this mean? It doesn't mean that you don't trust your employees, but you've got to trust but verify, right? You have to put those things in place, and you have to practice least privilege. If somebody doesn't need to have access to a specific type of data, restrict it. There's absolutely no need. And if they do have access to sensitive and highly restricted data that you may have, monitor the access that they have. There's technologies out there that will help you do that. Any questions so far? No? Okay. So when the National Guard team, when the Cyber Response Force, when they go into the organizations that are impacted by ransomware, these are some of the typical things that they see across the board. These are the trends that they've seen. Believe it or not, there's individuals that don't know their own topology, their network. How many devices do you have on your infrastructure? I don't know. Well, the thing is that you can't protect what you don't know. And so it's important for these organizations to have defined networks, defined list of their assets, know where your end devices are, know what mobile devices are connecting to your infrastructure, those types of things. Poor network security configuration. Another key issue that we see is because they're under-resourced, they will put infrastructure or on the network. There's nobody managing them. They'll invest in security tools, but there's nobody watching those alerts. In most of the cases, there's been some indication that there was ransomware that was going to happen, but nobody was there looking at that information to start the alert and clean the network as they needed to. So again, it's a common theme. End of life equipment. We have a problem where we are underfunding our infrastructure, the life cycle of our equipment. And we don't really understand. I think there's a lack of understanding from a leadership perspective as to why it's important to make sure that your routers, your switches, your desktops, that they're up to date, that you have the most recent version of it. Because a lot of those cases, they're vulnerable to something. And so if you're not on the most recent update, the most recent patch, and it's not just a patch, by the way, if you're not buying the most recent switch, there's usually a 5 to 7 year life cycle on a lot of those equipment. If you're not investing in those things, you're gonna be susceptible to something. The bad guys know that SLTT, the state, local, tribal territories, that we are low-hanging fruit. They know this, which is why last year we saw the largest increase in cyber attacks against state and local government. Focus on availability more than security. We just need our networks up. We don't care if I won't say we won't care that it's not secure, but we want to make sure that we have available resources for the citizens, which I understand, definitely. You want to make sure that the citizens can engage with their health and human services, with their life safety systems, 911, so on and so forth. But there has to be a happy balance between that operations and security. But unfortunately, it's swinging one way versus the other, and that's what leads to a lot of the issues that we're dealing with. Risk transference and cloud services. You know what? I can't afford to do it on-prem. I'm just going to put it in the cloud. I'll put it in Amazon or Rackspace or Microsoft Azure. Nothing changes. That infrastructure still needs to be patched. That infrastructure still needs to be maintained the same way as you would on a on-prem network or data center. So, and believe it or not, it's a shared risk environment. If something happens to your data in a cloud environment, it's not necessarily Amazon's fault. Majority of the data leaks that have occurred in the past few years, the S3 Slack leaks, you read about it all the time. Your data in the cloud is being, somebody found an opening and your data is out there. The reason why it's out there is because somebody on your team did not configure it correctly. And so when I say it's a shared risk, both sides hold a responsible element to that. And poor cyber hygiene, which is patching and the simple things that we don't do, but we should do. There was a statistic that I saw years ago, and it said that most of the breaches that we've seen, if we had patched our systems, let me try to remember exactly how it said it. 80% of the breaches would have been thwarted if the systems were patched. So just by simply making sure that your systems are up to date with their OS patches or their, the hardware, firmware upgrades, a lot of those breaches would not have occurred. And of course, lack of funding and prioritization. I think I beat that one too. To pay or not to pay. If you ask me, should you pay ransomware if you are infected by ransomware? My personal view is, of course, my military background, you don't negotiate with terrorists. And that's what they're doing. They're holding your data at ransom. But I will say this, that if you do pay, there's no guarantee that you're going to get your data back. And you're going to be paying twice. And the reason why I say paying twice is you may get the encryption key or the decryption key back in order to unencrypt your data, but you still have to do the same sanitization, the cleanup. You still have to go through your network. You still have to do those forensics to understand how far back, when did the bad guys get into my network, to know which backup to restore to. And that's one of the key things that we find within the counties when we go in and we do our forensics, is that if you're not backing up and you're not keeping adequate logs, you don't know exactly where to restore from. And if you don't know where to restore from, you could be restoring the ransomware right back on top of each other. And then you get reinfected again. And we've seen that happen in some cases. The most recent incident that took place last week with one of the counties, we were successful in figuring out from day one, from step one, when did they come into the network. And so you were able to go back to, January 15th, was when we saw this activity, this phishing email came in, somebody clicked it, it went from here to there, it downloaded this TrickBot malware, it did brute force attack on the passwords, it went XYZ, and you can see the whole timeline of that incident. That is key, because before you can give your blessing on your network and your system to say it is safe, you have to know that you've actually cleaned it and rebooted. Yes, I'm sorry, go ahead. Well, yeah, you have to make sure that you have done everything that you need to do in order to get your network back whole, and you can verify that it's secure.
Thank you. So my question has to do with, of course, you say no, we don't pay, right? But my question is this: if the system is compromised, right? And say you have a jurisdiction that wants to pay to hopefully, right, gain quick access, right? 69%. Mm-hmm. And your basis for not paying is, look, you're still going to have to sanitize your network and all of those things.
And let me add one thing real quick. And not only that, but you're monetizing the process. So now ransomware will never go away because they're making money from it.
Okay.
But
Sure.
Go ahead.
So my question is, given the cost, right, I'll use a catastrophic takeover. I'll use the city of Atlanta.
Yes.
Okay. If the cost to receive the encryption key or decryption key is $500,000, mm-hmm. Hopefully it works. Let's say it works 69% of the time, right? You pay that, sure, you still have to go through these other processes in order to ensure that the integrity of your systems are intact. What is your perspective on if you don't pay that $500,000 and then you spend $30 million to fix it, and there's no way you would have ever spent $30 million? I mean, how do you make, when you're talking those large systems, like, look, $500,000, and even if we have to sanitize, let's say we spend $5 million, but $30 million, or of a large, let's say if it's Los Angeles, let's say if it's Houston, let's say if it's Miami, New York, 100 million, 200 million. How do you, as a professional, say which is best?
And that's a very good question. And that goes to the, if you talk to the FBI, what they'll always say, at the end of the day, it's a business decision, right? You have to make that business decision based on, the financial and reputational repercussions that you may have by being down for X amount of time. I see your point, and that's not an easy answer, because as a business owner, that's a tough answer to make when you have to report to your leadership to say, yeah, we're going to be down for another 3 weeks because we have to do X, Y, Z. I'll say this, and this is Maria's take on it. Don't quote me on this, but this is Maria's take on it. If we are able to work together as a team, then we are able to reduce a lot of those costs. I think the exorbitant amount of money that you heard about being spent in some, like Atlanta, in Baltimore, we have third parties out there that charge a lot of money to do the forensics. Whereas a lot of our organizations have National Guard teams that can do that at a drastically reduced cost. And that's why I am very keen on leveraging those capabilities within North Carolina. Granted, there is a clause, they're not supposed to compete with private industry, but as a partner to the state, that's a resource that we need to leverage more. I met with the National Guardsmen from Maryland last month, I believe it was. And my question was, why weren't you involved? Why are they, why is the CIO for Maryland still holding the bag for the bill for all of this millions of dollars that they had to pay a third party for? These are the things that I think that we, which is why, again, the whole of state approach is a better approach. I think that we can leverage the capabilities that we have, because we already have capabilities that we can bring to bear in those cases, instead of going out and necessarily spending. There may be cases where it's above their head. We need a Mandiant, we need a Crowdstrike, we need one of those individuals in there. But you can scope the amount of work that they're doing to a smaller amount and manage the money a little bit better. And there's also the option of cyber insurance. I've never been a big proponent of insurance in general, other than my car insurance. But over the years, the fact that the cyber insurance allows you to have the funding to do certain things that you may not have the monies readily available for, such as notification. You have, I don't know, 1 million customer social security numbers in your system, and you have to notify all of those individuals. Do you have the money set aside to do this? No, most people don't, so especially a small company. So having that cyber insurance helps you to have that money, as well as crisis management. It helps you to have some key individuals that can come in and say, okay, this is what you need to do. This is how you need to involve, whether it's law enforcement. This is how you need to make sure that your customers are aware that we've been breached and how to contact us and the process that we're going through. And it sets a really good timeline. And it gives that professional forward-facing element that you may not necessarily have if you didn't have that. So I would also recommend entities having cyber insurance. Over 60% of our local government, they do have cyber insurance. It's a small amount, but it also helps. It helps to ease the pain and the burden on certain cases. But also, I would say some cyber insurance allows you to buy Bitcoins, if you're familiar with that, and that's what a lot of the ransomware actors, they typically want to be paid in Bitcoins. Some cyber insurance actually have a carve out for that. Again, I don't necessarily recommend that. I think that if there's a way for you to recover your environment in a timely manner, then the better option is to do it the right way versus paying the ransomware. If there's absolutely no way and you have the pressures and somebody's making that decision for you, then it's being made. But again, the more you pay into the system, the more that they're gonna come at you. And there is also statistics that say if you were hit by ransomware before, chances are in another 3 to 5 years, I'm full of statistics because I read all these documents, that you could get infected again or attacked again. So it's not a one and done. So again, as you can see here, you may pay, but 69% may get their data back, may not. 22% never got their data. And I know that there's, believe it or not, a lot of the bad guys try to be true to paying or to giving you the decryption key because it's a business for them. If they don't give you the decryption key, then they're not looked at as a viable partner, and so they lose that. Their reputation gets sullied. Believe it or not, they have a reputation that they want to uphold as well. Don't ask me why, but so. Who's ever seen this? So this was done by a company called Crowdstrike, and they're well known in the cyber forensics field. But this is the speed, the adversarial speed. Once they get into your network, once you click that link and they get access to your network, this is how fast it takes them to spread across your environment. Number one, 18 minutes. Fancy Bear, that's the moniker that they use for Russian actors, nation-state actors. 18 minutes for them to compromise your whole network. So you think about it, it takes longer for you to put in a trouble ticket. North Korea, 2 hours, 20 minutes. Panda is China, 4 hours. Kitten, Iran, 5 hours. And Spider is just e-crime in general. With the last incident that we had, the whole timeline for them to compromise that county's infrastructure was actually 2 weeks. But if it was, and that's why I've told the individuals that I was talking to and briefing on, that if it was a nation-state attack, it would have been that same day. So definitely it was more e-crime, let's spray it, send some emails out there, see who clicks on it, and then go from there. And then once they get the ransomware request, if they contact us, then we know, aha, now I've got you. Because a lot of times they don't even know who the victims are until you actually contact them to figure out what your next steps are. So this is what we're up against. Again, this is why we do the whole of state approach within North Carolina. And there's some things that at DIT, Department of Information Technology, that we've done to help our local government to get them a little bit better postured. We have our National Guard cyber team they're going out and they're doing assessments on the county infrastructure, assessments and training to help to identify what those high priority risks are and give them a way of remediating them before moving on. Because what's happening in November, actually March 3rd, we start our election seasons, right? So we got to make sure that our county infrastructure, that they're secure. So they have been a really good partner with us going out there. We have purchased solutions like BitSite. And if you're not familiar with BitSite, it's sort of a credit score solution that it provides you. It looks from your exterior of your environment. It pulls information, open source information. So it knows the same information that the bad guys know about you, they know about you, and they aggregate it and present it to you in a score. So you'll have a score between, say, 500 and 900. If you're at the 500 point, you are more susceptible to being breached, because usually they're seeing a lot of botnet activities, a lot of malware coming out of your network, open ports, just a bunch of bad practices that are in place. So we've purchased that, and we're monitoring. We have the counties have the ability to get alerts on their infrastructure. So when the score drops, then they're alerted and they can go in and request, hey, what's going on? What do I need to remediate? So on and so forth. We're doing that for state agencies as well. Continuous monitoring project, again, I mentioned, we have a pilot program right now. We're in the process of deploying network sensors on the county infrastructure that will do some of the block and tackling of the anomalous traffic that we're seeing. And the reason why we're doing that is so that we know that they're under-resourced. So we're trying to help them as much as possible by giving them not another tool that's going to alert and alarm, but another tool that will actually block bad traffic that's coming at them. We have a statewide significant cyber incident plan. That was put in place, I think we've had that now for almost 2 years. And the goal of that is, how do we react when something goes south from a state perspective? What if the attack is on our critical infrastructure? What if somebody attacks our 911 systems and brings it down? How do we, as a state, operate? How do we pull these resources together and launch them out? And how do we work with our federal partners? So that plan details that. And House Bill 217 was signed August of last year. And what that basically said, and I'll cover it in another slide, it just says that local governments now have to report cyber incidents up to us. Believe it or not, in the past, local governments, there was nothing that mandated local government to report cyber incidents. And so we've heard through, anecdotal comments, so on and so forth, that, I got hit by ransomware and I paid it because, I didn't know you guys existed. And so the past year and a half, we've been trying to do a Winning Hearts and Minds campaign, going out to the local government, trying to let them know we're here as a resource. We have to pull together. I'm not 100% resourced the way I should be. Nobody is, unless you're maybe a Fortune 100 company or something and you have all the money that you can throw at it. But together we're stronger, and that's the motto that we've been using. And also, I've mentioned before, the incident response team with the National Guard and local IT strike team. These are specifics that are detailed within House Bill 217. And I highlighted the bottom because this is where you come in. As a private sector company, you should feel, I hope you feel, that there will be some benefit in reporting your cyber incidents up to the state. And the reason why we say this is not so that we can get into your business. It's so that if you are attacked a certain way, we are able to trend and go, okay, this person was attacked with this type of virus. It could potentially be going to you next. And so we're trying to figure out how can we pull all this analytic data together and do some kind of proactive analysis on it and determine where could the next victim be. Share those indicators of compromise. And the indicator of compromise is just the IP addresses of the bad guys, not your IP addresses, nothing related to your infrastructure. Personally, I don't care who you are that's reporting it as much as what you report, because your information will be kept anonymized. By law, anything dealing with your infrastructure, security incidents, so on and so forth, is kept confidential. We don't share the details of your environment. But these are some of the things we talk about. Privacy. Privacy is another big element to the state that we're trying to to incorporate a statewide privacy program where we can take advantage of some of the laws that you've seen being enacted in different states. We're going to be moving in that direction as well, because privacy is the next frontier. It's been, but we've a little bit been behind that whole initiative. Cyber awareness training. How many of you do cyber awareness training within your organizations? And how do you mind me asking, how do you deliver the training?
So I'm from Wisconsin, and we have a statewide computer
I know Wisconsin.
system.
Yes.
And what we're doing with cyber training, it's a multi-pronged approach. I mean, we have our tech folks working on the security of the network and the switches and all of that. But we've determined our biggest liabilities are users. So we are doing annual, semi-annual cyber training on phishing attacks and a variety of other kind of attacks. You know, dropped flash drives, all that kind of stuff. Mostly through video and participation by each employee. It's a mandatory training. Every user in our system must take that training, and they must pass that training. And then we have periodic phishing emails, tests that we send out to our users continually through the year. And if someone fails that, they get more training. And they're required to take that training on a quarterly or semi-annual or twice a year kind of a training thing. So that's how we've approached it in Wisconsin so far. And it's a work in progress.
I think anything, and thank you for that. I think that's a great example of how to deliver your training and to make sure that you're doing continuous learning to the employees within your organization. At DIT, I think the key thing is make it mandatory. The first year that I was at the state, I realized that they were pushing out training, but there was no mandate. So people, you would take it or you wouldn't take it, no one cared. So the first thing that I did was to make it mandatory. That is key. And that is absolutely perfect and definitely the way to go. Sir?
What do you do if they do not take the training?
I like shaming, but
No, what we've decided to
do.
do, I'm on the steering group of our automation system, is if they fail to take the training for elected officials like judges and justices, they lose their internet access. And they lose their ability to get emails from anybody that's not in our system. For random users, line level users, non-elected officials, they lose their access to the system. They cannot do their job. We turn them off, and it's been a progression. We've been at this for about 3 or 4 years now, and every year it's like, okay, we're not getting enough compliance. So this last year, that's what we came up with in terms of consequence.
And you will always get pushback from, I do the quote fingers, the VIPs. But you know what? They are the whales. They're the ones that the bad guys are trying to get at, and they're the ones that would be the quickest to click. So we actually run phishing, believe it or not, we run phishing exercises on our cabinet members. Secretary of Transportation, we do all of them. And then, my boss will take it at the cabinet meeting and go, yes, you failed and you failed. So, you got to show leadership. Leadership at the top, it comes down. So you have to make them part of the process because they are high value targets on the network. And I love the fact that you were able to actually shut down their access to the internet, because that's how we did it in DoD. But typically you get a lot of pushback. So that one takes a little bit longer to implement. Yes. So the key things, sorry, go ahead, sir.
Quick question about cloud servers, since obviously a lot of governments are going to this.
Yes.
How does that work with a third-party cloud provider like Google or AWS or whatever? If there's an attack, how do they get that data and lock it down if it's on a third-party cloud server? How does that, and how do they ransom it?
So if I'm understanding your question correctly, say you have a SaaS product, and the SaaS product sits on an Amazon platform. That's two different contracts. It's actually the vendor has to work with Amazon to lock down that environment. And that's one of the things when you go into a cloud environment, you have to be careful about how the contracts are written. You have to make sure that there's a clear line identifying who's responsible for what. If the application sits on, because Amazon is only worried about, or AWS is, and Azure, they're only worried about their infrastructure. And a lot of the block and tackling that is going to be done on their firewalls for their infrastructure, not your application. So when that vendor puts their application in the cloud, they have to purchase a firewall and all these other security tools on top of it and actually monitor that unless they have a contract with Amazon to do managed systems.
So like, for example, say your file server is on Azure and
Yes.
you click the phishing email. So would Microsoft have a block on that?
Not on that, no.
Okay.
You have to make sure that you purchase the security tools to monitor for that and prevent that.
And then what would happen if they did get into that cloud? How would they ransom it if it's on a third-party server? Maybe, I hope I'm making sense. You
Well,
see what I mean?
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter
matter.
what the infrastructure is because it's just a file that gets opened up and then launched like a worm, and it's going to take over whatever those files are. Clouds
Right.
can, I will tell you this, the next attack vector is cloud. And we've seen that happen in, or managed service. We had last year a school system, 17 schools. I don't know, are you familiar with that? Columbus County was on my list. The whole school system was brought down because they had a core infrastructure. You can call it, whether it's in the cloud or on-prem, it's cloud to everybody else that's using it because it's not being managed by them. That's my definition of cloud.
Would you say that it's better for governments to get away from hard servers and go into the cloud? Is it a safer environment?
I would say not necessarily,
Okay.
because it goes back to it's a shared risk environment. And so no matter what you do, if you're not configured correctly, you're susceptible whether you're on-prem or in the cloud.
Thank you.
So going back to training, make sure that if you're not doing it right now, make sure that you have a training program in place because it's very important. The low-hanging fruit are your end users. Do things like, and these are some of the things that we've tried to do at DIT. We have it in place. We have screensavers. I have rotating screensavers with just little tidbits of security things. Hey, don't be oversharing Sharon, or don't give all this information out, or don't click on these links, or look for these things before you click on a link. Our emails, we have a tag on all of our emails that says, hey, this is an external email. So if it looks like it's coming from somebody internal and it has that external banner, then you know that there's something wrong. Something's being spoofed. We do phishing exercises as well. Test them, make them paranoid. It's not bad to have your staff a little bit paranoid about clicking on a link, because nobody wants to be that person that's responsible for bringing down the network. How am I looking on time?
Just fine, about 1:45, so we have about a half an hour, folks. So go right ahead.
Okay. Some more on House Bill 217 as far as assessments. One of the things that we added was life cycle. Now, when most organizations, when they purchase solutions, they never consider the life cycle management of that solution. They never consider in 5 years, I'm going to need to upgrade that infrastructure. They purchase something and they step away from it. And that's why you end up with end-of-life systems. So we've put in the law that organizations, state agencies, need to factor in the security lifecycle management of those systems when they're making their purchase. Let's see. This is my final slide. Really what I'm saying here is we have to work together as a team in order to combat cybersecurity. This is an initiative, and I know I'm forecasting this, but look for this. This is where you come into play. We've partnered with United Way and this organization called Cybercrime Network. So you're familiar with the 211? Stay tuned for 211. 211 was usually a number that is allocated for, like during a hurricane, if people want to know where resources are and they need help in certain things, but it doesn't rise to a 911 call, the 211 is there. Well, with the partnership with the 211 and the Cybercrime Network, we're going to be launching this year, hopefully, a program that is more forward-facing to the citizens. So the 211 operators are going to be trained similar to the 911 operators trained on emergencies. They're going to be trained on how to answer specific cyber questions, and also to guide our citizens as to who they need to talk to if they're impacted by a crime, whether it's a business email compromise or ransomware or so on and so forth. So they're going to be sort of, I call them like a tier 1 help desk for the state for citizens. And I'm super excited about this because when I talk about the whole of state approach, that piece, that's the linchpin. It ties everything in. We have programs that support the government side of the house, and now we'll have a program that will support our citizens and small businesses. Because I don't know if you know this or not, but 67% of small businesses that get impacted by ransomware do not recover. Most people cannot recover from that, a small business. They can't afford to pay the ransomware that's being asked, or after they've done that, there's nothing left. So if you're a small business, think about that. Think about how you should be backing up your data. There are solutions out there that will back up your data by a second. Like you can go back a second before the ransomware hit and recover from that. Do the research on those types of solutions that are out there. But make sure that you have multiple versions of your backups. You have an on-prem version, you may have a cloud version, something like that. Make sure an offline version, because as we try to get ahead of the game and try to be more proactive and protect our networks, they're getting just as skilled. So we have to stay, abreast of that. I think in my opinion, the best way is to always have an offline copy of your backups. And that offline copy may not be the most up-to-date, depending on what your backup schedule is, but at least it gets you back to a known good state. Make sure that you are investing in someone within your organization. I don't know how large your organizations are, but make sure you're investing in someone that can bring security acumen to your environment. How many of you have a security person on staff? You have an IT person? So they're not the same. And sadly, that's what we see, because we understand there's a lot of, there's cost implications, right, by having somebody on staff, and the security folks are very expensive. And there's a huge shortage. I think here I go with another statistic. The last statistic that I saw was by 2030, there's going to be 4.3 million shortage of cyber professionals worldwide. So that should tell you that the problem's not going away. It's getting worse, and we're having a huge shortage of these professionals out there. So what do we need to do? We need to train the staff that we have right now. Because instead of paying for a high-end security person, invest in your people. Send them to the courses that they need to embed security into your different groups so that you can make sure that you have somebody on staff that can support you. Well, you know what? That's what happens. It's a risk, but what's the risk of not training them? Then you have somebody that's not qualified to support your infrastructure. Look at your school systems. There's a lot of schools out there, community colleges that we have. We're partnering with a community college to create that pipeline. So you can get a young, enterprising student that you can pull in for low cost, and you may not get them for 10, 20 years, because nobody does that anymore. This generation, they don't stay in a job for 20 years. They're jumping every 2, 3, sometimes a year. They will jump because they have that mindset. They're always chasing something, whether it's the money, because the money is there. But you may find that gem that wants to stay in your environment and be part of that organization. So there's an organizational change. Tap into your community colleges and work with them, because they all have security programs right now, and they're looking for apprentices, internships. They're looking for companies to engage with. I work primarily with Fayetteville Tech. They have a really good program. There's also Wake Tech and Forsyth. Very good programs that they have there. In North Carolina, we have 9 centers of excellence, 9 NSA. They've been designated by the NSA and Department of Homeland Security as cyber centers of excellence. I don't know if you know that. We have 9 of them. A&T is one, NC State is one, those other community colleges that I mentioned, ECU, trying to think of some of the other ones, UNC Charlotte. These are all cyber centers of excellence within the state of North Carolina. So that means that their programs on an annual basis is assessed by these organizations to meet their requirements for cyber education. And with that, I think that ends my briefing. Any questions?
And so, folks, we have about 20 minutes and just a terrific
long
wealth of
time.
information here. So, but let's just open it up, and maybe I'll just ask if I can. What do you think about this vulnerability testing? I guess outside groups can come in and test your.
Are you talking about bug bounty?
I think so. I'm not sure.
So,
thank you.
If I understand your question about the bug bounty program, this is where you have a company that is vetted, that comes in and they will find vulnerabilities in your infrastructure and then present it to you. They do, the Pentagon does it. They have Hack the Pentagon, they have these hackathons all the time. But I think they're good programs, but you have to go in with a defined scope. You don't want somebody to tell you that you have 2 missing patches on this server. You already know that. You can scan your environment and figure that out. I think where it would bring value to you is if you have those particular systems that are core to your organization and you've completely locked it down and you're saying, okay, have at it. Show me if there's a vulnerability. You know, something that is part of a critical infrastructure, if you will, within your organization. And then you also have to make sure that you have an NDA in place and that nobody leaks that information out. Sir.
Given that we're court systems, you mentioned early on state actors.
Yes.
To what extent should court systems be thinking about being the targets of state actors at some point in the future? And do you know anything about whether the intelligence community has picked up any indication that the judicial systems should be particularly aware of that risk in kind of causing civil disruption?
Nothing along those lines, but I will say this, that based on the report that I mentioned earlier about the legal offices being breached and so on and so forth, there's information out there that is useful to some individuals. If they're specifically targeting a particular, let's say a electoral individual, and they want to find out more about him, they want to find out whether or not there's any cases against them, they would definitely target your environment. And I think you're going back to what I said earlier, it's a target-rich environment because nobody's thinking that way. And pardon my expression when I say this, or pardon, I don't mean to devalue the legal process when I say this, but a protective order or an NDA or those types of things, they're on paper. The bad guys, it means nothing to them because they can easily hack into your system regardless of what that is. So when an organization comes to the state and says, hey, we have a protective order, we'll protect the data, so on and so forth, show me the money. I'm gonna come in, I'm gonna assess that environment. I need to know how you're locking it down. Is it encrypted at rest? Is it encrypted in transit? Who has access to that data? These are the types of things that need to be in place. If your data is encrypted at rest, which means you're using like a FIPS level, an NSA level encryption, vetted encryption, then if they encrypt that data, they're not going to be able to use it. Even after they encrypt on top of it or try to encrypt on top of it, you know that data is useless to them, so you can go, have at it. And that's another reason why you don't even have to pay ransomware, because they can't use it for anything.
Are there, I don't want to say, cost-effective ways by which, whether it's courts, for those of us that have internal information technology staff, or whether we're using our local jurisdictions information technology departments to test our systems? I mean, like, is there a set way to do that? If you say, hey, we need to test our system, see if we're vulnerable to attack, because you mentioned earlier something about attacks through, where your switches may be, and I guess it never occurred to me that a data switch might be a point of intrusion to get into, or by which ways malware may enter through your system. But is there a way that we can do something to test the systems that we have that we can sell back home as being a cost-effective way of going about doing that?
I will say this, without understanding your environment and understanding your resources and capabilities, take a look, are you doing scans within your environment? There are vulnerability scans out there that we at the state, we scan every 7 days. So your system is being hit every 7 days to figure out, okay, what's the next vulnerability that's there, and sometimes there's 0 days. So I would say if you're able to scan your environment from an external and also an internal perspective, then you're able to get a good indication of what your security posture is. There's third parties out there that will, if your environment is small, it doesn't cost that much. It may be, and that's probably relative, I would say maybe $15,000, $20,000, depending on how small your environment is. They can come in and they'll do a holistic look at your environment. And it's not just the infrastructure, it's also your processes that you have in place. Because you have to make sure that when I walk away, after I've done my assessment, that the scanning just doesn't stop and the patching doesn't stop because, well, they're not looking at us anymore. So having a consistent process in place for vulnerability management is definitely key. I don't know if that answers your question, but we at the state, we also have, and I don't know how your organization is aligned with state and local government, but we have contracts that local government entities can actually use. It's our 918A security services. And so we've pre-vetted these vendors so that you fast track the procurement process, because we have to go through this long, arduous process to do any kind of procurement. But it fast tracks that and allows them to have that, a faster way of getting those services. I will also say too, take a look at forensics retainers. These are a small amount of money that basically you set aside with a particular vendor that says if something happens, they will be on site within an hour or 2 hours, depending on what that is, to help you recover, versus when you're in a crisis mode and your hair is on fire trying to figure out what to do next. So these are the key things that I think that will definitely help you and reduce some of that risk.
Don't mean to make you a spokesperson for the National Guard, but can you speak more to what's been communicated to you about the National Guard across the country in terms of having cybersecurity resources available to other parts of state and local government?
So yes, and I can't speak for them, but because I work with them all the time, every state uses their assets differently. We in North Carolina, we make good use of our assets. We utilize them more than they are sometimes able to keep up. But we've also worked with augmenting their staff with contractors, because we know that we have, again, going back to what I said earlier, we have elections coming up. So we want to make sure that they're going through and assessing the county infrastructure for security issues. But you'll go to another state and they take a hands-off approach. So if you see in one state, you see in one state. There's no consistent way in which some of the states deploy their National Guard assets. One of the key things I would say that sets us apart from the other states, if you go back and you Google what's been happening in Louisiana, they've been in a constant state of emergency. And that's because their school systems, their local government, they keep getting hit by ransomware. Well, the governor, in order for them to activate their National Guardsmen, the governor has to declare a state of emergency. In North Carolina, we don't have to declare a state of emergency. None of those, the incidents that I mentioned, required us to do a state of emergency by Governor Cooper. All we had to do is, because we've established an MOU, a memorandum of understanding with our National Guardsmen that said they can do assessments with us, they can do this, they can do all these things. So again, it goes back to the bat phone. Lieutenant Colonel Felicio, I need you, this is what's gonna happen, we need to, XYZ, we need to deploy some forces over here to remediate and recover from this incident. Does that answer your question? Any other questions? And if you have any questions after, please feel free to contact me. I think, no, my information's not up there. One other thing I'd like to plug, our website on it.nc.gov, there's a cybersecurity place or area there on that website that is full of information. And it's not just geared to government. there is a forward-facing, there's for your family and your kids, those types of things. Because I think a lot of times people think that the only time I need to be cyber secure is when I'm at work. And then when you go home, a lot of people access their work networks from home. Sometimes they use their same assets, their home assets, to access their work infrastructure. And that's how you get, compromised in some cases. So if you click on a link at home or at work, if you don't do that at work, don't do it at home. It's the same rules apply. Make sure that you're taking those same precautions in your day-to-day duties.
What was the website again?
it.nc.gov. So in addition to the 211 that's coming, we're going to be rebranding our site as well to make it more forward-facing, because we definitely see a need to ensure that our citizens and our residents of North Carolina know that we're there as a resource, and that there are things that, some information that we can provide to them to help them. Like, for example, there's a lot of open source tools out there that cost you $0 that you can deploy within your network. You just need somebody that's trained in order to do that. But there's a lot of little tips and tricks to ensuring that your environment is safe without expending, a lot of money. A lot of the companies would like you to think that you need to buy, maybe the Crowdstrikes or so on and so forth. But if you have the right amount of tools and you have somebody that can monitor effectively, you can be just as, effective in keeping your network safe and secure.
So Maria, you've given us so much to think about, and I tell you, practical tips, but also some good strategies. And I want to thank you for your service. It's comforting to know there are people like you to work with here. So on behalf of our NACOM conference planners in the group, we just want to thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And then folks, I think you know the drill by now, but we do want your feedback both on the program and our speakers. It's all part of that app there. And I think we're adjourned for now. Maria, thanks again.
Thank you.